There are calls for National Treasury to avail the 459 billion rand sitting in the coffers of the Reserve Bank in the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve account. According to the Institute for Economic Justice, Treasury's democratic duty is to use available resources to improve basic rights and services. And this, of course, is said to be in anticipation of that medium-term budget policy statement that will be delivered by the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, this afternoon at about 2 p.m. Dr. Kelle Howson is Senior Research Consultant at the Institute for Economic Justice, and she joins us now to weigh in on this. Thank you very much, Doc, for your time this afternoon. Perhaps let's start with characterizing South Africa's economy. What is your understanding, at least?
In the lead up to the medium-term budget policy statement, we've heard a lot from the business press and from the National Treasury that South Africa is facing a fiscal crisis or a fiscal cliff. And we've put out some work, a detailed policy brief interrogating this claim. Are we really in a fiscal crisis that is worse than the crises that we've faced in recent years? And what we found is that the budget deficit, or the mismatch between spending and revenue, is roughly in line with deficits that we had in 2019 and 2018. It's not historically anomalous. But, of course, we are in a much deeper structural crisis, and we have been for a very long time. And that's the crisis of unemployment and the crisis of poverty and economic exclusion. And we need a serious reform in our macroeconomic and our fiscal policy in order to address those crises.
And it is nothing new as we fetch 30 years as a democratic country. What has disallowed for these fundamental changes to take place?
We put a lot of the responsibility for this at the door of government. Whilst there have been policies since 1994 that have aimed to grow the economy in an inclusive way, ultimately fiscal policy hasn't allowed for that. So the economy has not been creating the kind of job growth that we need to see, and we haven't had the kind of GDP growth that we need to see, and that's the result of government failure. That's the result of poor policy making that has essentially choked infrastructure, choked basic services, and made it very difficult for people to participate in the economy.
Dr. Howson, you suggest that then the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve account should be unlocked. What is that, firstly? Maybe introduce it to our viewers.
Sure. Look, so the South African Reserve Bank holds reserves in the form of foreign currency and gold, and those are used as a buffer against external shocks. When the value of those reserves, those assets changes, the bank may make a profit on those assets. And that's what the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve account represents. So it's the profit on those underlying assets. Right now, there is a large balance in that account, especially in historical terms. So there's, as you say, 459 billion rand worth of profit that has been made on those underlying assets. According to the Reserve Bank Act, that profit is essentially owed to the National Treasury as in the form of revenue. So the National Treasury can draw on that account in order to supplement its spending on basic services and infrastructure.
If it's as easy as it sounds, why hasn't it happened? Any idea?
There are a number of arguments that have been advanced against drawing on these reserves in recent weeks, especially since the IEJ, in an open letter signed by 100 policy experts, floated it as a possibility. A couple of the arguments that have been advanced have said the profits in that account are unrealized, so they haven't essentially been converted into real money yet. In order to realize those profits, the Reserve Bank would need to do one of a couple of things, either sell underlying assets or realize them in a different way through the markets. And so there's been resistance from the business press around doing this. There's also the argument that we need to maintain a buffer. We need to maintain a rainy day fund. And that's true. We do need to maintain a buffer against the risk of external shocks or of capital flight. But right now we have a very big buffer, and arguably much bigger than we need to. We're talking about a revenue shortfall of 52 billion rand compared to 459 billion in that account. So that's money that is owed to Treasury. Essentially, that's money that is owed to the South African people, that people have the right to benefit from. And we're saying that in the context of our immediate budget mismatch, Treasury has a duty to consider every possible option to protect people from hunger and ensure that basic services remain in place. And this is a feasible, relatively risk-free way of doing so.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your time this afternoon. Dr. Kelle Howson, Senior Research Consultant at the Institute for Economic Justice, with their argument that the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve account should be unlocked to solve some of the fiscal challenges that the country is going through.